Welcome to The Terrible Take, a mini podcast telling Steelers Nation what's on our mind. I'm Josh Carney. There is no denying that expectations and overall positive thoughts regarding the Pittsburgh Steelers offensive line remains in the tank ahead of the 2022 season. 1 year after struggling to protect the aging Ben Roethlisberger and failing to consistently open up rushing lanes for Najee Harris, the Steelers' offensive line returns 3 of 5 starters from last season in left tackle Dan Moore Jr., left guard Kevin Dotson, and right tackle Chukwuma Okorafor. In free agency, the Steelers added veterans Mason Cole and James Daniels, as you all know, to solidify the interior of the offensive line, swapping out the likes of Kendrick Green and Trey Turner for the 2 veterans, with over 100 combined starts in the NFL. Not only were the Steelers active in free agency, they made changes on the coaching staff for the offensive line as well, bringing in veteran offensive line coach Pat Meyer to replace Adrian Clem and Chris Morgan, who left for the University of Oregon and the Chicago Bears, respectively. Still, the prevailing belief among the fan base and some in the national media, as well as the local media, is that the Steelers didn't do enough to address the offensive line, whether that was through free agency or via the draft. I ask this. What exactly were the expectations there? The Steelers were never going to be in the mix for the big-ticket items in free agency along the offensive line, like left tackle Terron Armstead, considering he signed for $15 million a year with Miami. La'el Collins was an option at right tackle at $7 million a year. But at almost 29 years old, the Steelers opted to go with the 24-year-old Okorafor, who they knew well, on a cheaper deal while being a younger player overall. Names like veterans Nate Solder, Eric Fisher, and Dwayne Brown remain on the open market, but none of those guys are fixing any issues with the Steelers' offensive line. I'd personally much rather roll with Dan Moore Jr. at left tackle for the next few years and let him develop, rather than signing a washed-up veteran just for brand name appeal. In the draft, who exactly were the targets for the Steelers in their respective draft slots that were realistic options based on Steelers history in terms of pro day visits and combine interviews? LSU guard Ed Ingram in the second round, maybe? Memphis guard Dylan Parham in the third? Virginia Tech lineman Luke Tenuta and Lakeita Smith in round 6? Ohio State offensive tackle Thayer Munford Jr. in the 7th? Or maybe Michigan offensive lineman Andrew Stuber? Or Penn State's Rasheed Walker in the 7th? Those are the names that are realistic options. As you can see, not much was there that moves the needles for the Steelers' offensive line. Of those names I just mentioned, who was going to solidify the Steelers' offensive line right away or make you feel better about what the Steelers did to address the offensive line? For me, none of them. I understand the frustration with the offensive line in general, and running it back with a name like Okorafor at right tackle. But it's not like the Steelers had these wealth of options and decided they were simply going to ignore it in the draft and in free agency on purpose, like many are trying to push. They obviously liked Cole and Daniels a lot, considering they moved quickly to sign both in free agency, and made sure they didn't lose Okorafor as well. With an improved interior offensive line and the return to health of Kevin Dotson, as well as some added mobility at quarterback with Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett, this offensive line should be better in 2022 than they were last season. That might be a low bar, and look, I get it, but it's true. It's simply time to stop pushing the narrative that the Steelers didn't do enough on the offensive line, much like Bleacher Report's Gary Davenport just tried to do. They did what they could. That's not a position group that's completely fixed overnight without significant trades, salaries, or serious good fortune in the draft. It takes time. The Steelers have the right people in place now to address it. Be sure to follow us at SteelersDepot.com and check out episodes of The Terrible Take every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And check out The Terrible Podcast with Alex Kozora and Dave Bryan every Tuesday and Friday.